All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the environmental forum. I'll get into a little bit about the format of our forum in a second, but bathrooms are over through that doorway. We do have access to them. I still apologize, I have a cough drop in my mouth because I have a tickle in my throat. We also have tea and coffee at the back of the room in the doorway. Please help yourself. If you have any questions about that as well, just raise your hand and bother me. It's not a big deal. I do encourage you to move around, specifically up towards the table. I know we're not all going to fit at the table, but this is really the chance to start the conversation and the dialogue around the town of Bolton and climate adaptation and resiliency. We recently applied to the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program Planning Grant, which we are still waiting on the announcement for. And the announcement meaning if we are awarded or not the funds. Even if we're not awarded the funds, this is the chance for us to start the conversation still, because not only as I'm reviewing the conservation's wetlands regulations or bylaws and seeing that we really need a little bit more teeth if we're going to address these issues that we're seeing and that come up in the news and that other towns are starting to address. But before we start digging into bylaws and regulations, we need to hear from you all, whether you're residents of Bolton or local towns, and figure out where exactly we need to hone these efforts in. Whether it's flooding, whether it's storm management from runoff from developments, more so than there is already, whether it's nature-based solutions, land acquisition, there's a whole suite of solutions, and you can combine a lot of those tools. So what we're looking for tonight, very informal, like I said. We're going to open up the discussion to you all about, because I would like to hear where our vulnerabilities are, maybe where are our strengths, but maybe supplementing those strengths. And then we'll talk about what other towns are doing bordering Bolton and maybe matching their efforts as well. Again, this is very informal, so feel free to come up. We're going to be working off of the wetlands map first, actually, and I encourage you, I did bring some stickies, so come up, put a sticky on where you think we have vulnerable areas or where you think we could improve areas or practices, and then we're going to talk about them. So does anybody have something off the top of their head? Come on up. And if you could just give your name and whether you're a resident of Bolton or not, that would be beneficial.
Pat Vincent, I've been here for almost 50 years. It's really kind of a scary thought. Well, what I wanted to focus on, and I'm not sure I'm smart enough to know exactly where it is, but the conservation land behind my house, but it's also behind about 6 houses in the center, and Bolton Bean is the brook, the Great Brook. It's fed by the brook itself, the septic or sewage, storm drains off of Main Street up to top of the hill, Harvard Road, and all of the hills across the street from my house. And about 15 years ago, 2.5 beavers completely flooded that whole area. And somehow I think that a big storm would do a lot. I don't believe I can't get back there anymore, but there's no maintenance to keep the brook clear. We used to have Mosquito Control that kept branches and everything out of the brook. So it backs up and it can impact the septic systems in the center, and then some of the houses are lower than mine, so it would impact them as well. So I just wanted to throw that one out there. So it's really the storm drainage system that comes down, goes through what we used to call Frog Pond, and then goes back behind the school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it sounds like our first vulnerability in the town, which I'm sure some of you actually see near your homes or whether you're on our conservation properties, which is we do have a lot of wetlands, like you can see on our lovely wetland map. We do have 4 cold water fisheries in the town of Bolton. So not only do we have these resource areas that we want to be mindful of for flood remediation and becoming more resilient from these high precipitation storms and high velocity storms, like Pat was saying, because of flooding of the brooks and rivers, and then you exceed your floodplain in some events, which we're seeing more and more frequently. How do we address that? So Pat brought up how in the past they've been removing branches and maintaining that stream channel so that it wasn't overtopping multiple times a year or multiple storms. So that's one example, and that's something that Hudson can address, but it would take some permitting, but it's not to say it can't be done. Does anybody else have anything? I just know that.
Blanco. Three spots that I know of is this, no, where's Harvard? Up here, okay. This area here, where we're fighting the 40B, this is all Von Hill. And the water all,
So it's still
oh,
over.
okay.
This is
And
Von Hill.
the water all goes down there and goes across the road, floods. And this all goes into the Nashua River. So that is a chokehold for all the water draining off of Von Hill. And that needs to be protected. There's also the Hanson land on Green Road. People have been concerned about if we have massive water and going through here and flooding the houses that go along here. And then, of course, Five Shire was another chokehold too. Years ago, they have fixed it, but I don't know if we had major stuff and it goes over the dam, or we have blockages, what's gonna happen with that too. So that's a you.
So that is a large watershed area that Ron was talking about, that all really comes down to a point into a tributary known as Quarry Brook, which then flows into Still River. Again, water resources. So we also have beavers in town, again, whether it's on conservation property and holding back water and creating stream channels like on Von Hill. We have a substantially large beaver dam, and that's what Rona was talking about is, if that lets go, where's the water going? And just making sure that the properties south of that, or south of that property aren't being negatively impacted.
I just want to be in defense of the beavers.
Yes, I'm not saying that either.
Because they actually hold the water in place and it helps recharge our water supply underneath, among other things. So I'm very happy with the beavers.
Yes. So mentioning the beaver dam was not stating removing the beaver dam, because on our conservation properties, something I'm a huge proponent of, if it's not impacting septic systems, if it's not impacting wells, single family homes, and they can live there, that's the best place for them to be. We have a lot of beaver activity over on Bower Springs too, and on Von Hills, and some other conservation properties, and that's where they should be, away from everyone, in their own habitat, and creating more habitat for other species. And they do provide, like Rona said, a value to holding back that water from the flood, so it's not from flood damage, so it's not causing that constantly. And I think, anyone else? I think Alice had a comment.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Pat brought up the fact that at one point, the branches and everything were cleared from that stream, and I'm just wondering, why did that stop?
I don't know the answer to that question. That was before my time here. But it may have just been manpower, or Pat may have an answer for you.
I'm not all that tall. It was stopped. We used to have the mosquito control crowd here. And the town decided not to fund the mosquito control program anymore. And they literally would go through the brook and clean everything out to keep the mosquito population down. And when we stopped funding it as a town, at least that's the main piece that I took away. They left. Now, we didn't also want spraying.
And that was a town vote.
Yeah, at town meeting.
Yeah.
So, I think we can do the clearing, as you said, with permitting, without mosquito control spray.
Yeah. And there's other companies too that do that kind of work if it's not mosquito specific, or a mosquito company can do it as well. And they do, there is a certain value to that beyond just reducing, I guess, mosquito populations. Also, you're removing sediment as you're dredging out areas that may have had a lot of road sediment come off between plowing and people driving. Even after storms, you see a lot of debris within waterways. So there is a positive thing to doing that, but you just have to be careful with how much disturbance, and that's where the permitting comes into place. Yes.
So can I make a comment on the other end of the
Yes,
spectrum?
of course.
So we talked about climate events where there's a surge of water or a lot of precipitation coming, but a few years ago when we had the drought, many of us in Bolton local were very concerned about that. And so I think a vulnerability that we're concerned about, and I guess I speak for myself, Laura Kistich from Bolton, but a lot of members of Bolton local also are concerned about that, is raising awareness. I mean, wells are drying up, and people are still auto-watering their lawn to get the velvet lawn look, and other people in other parts of town, we're trying to source water elsewhere because their wells are dried up. So I think drought and water management in general is something that I think we're rather vulnerable to from a drought perspective.
On that, can I ask a question? Sure. So, because this has been brought up on the Bolton Facebook page multiple times in the summer, and some people have said that, and my husband is a believer in this, that different wells, depending on the depth, tap into different veins. So, like people conserving in one area of town might not necessarily, or you, like us conserving, might not necessarily help our next door neighbor because they have a shallower well and we have a deeper. Is that true or not? I've been trying to get an answer to that.
Well, when my house was inspected, the person who did the inspection said, when he measured our well and told us how many feet down it was, he's like, yeah, in this town, there's varying degrees of well depth in this town. So, but the question about what vein those wells tap into,
Yeah.
a couple of years, that would be another aspect of this that I think is needed, a program on the aquifers in the area. And, we share water supply. Water supply beneath the ground doesn't know our town's borders, so we're all sharing in this whole region. So, so I don't know specifically your well versus your neighbors, but I think in general we have that need for general information
Yeah.
about the aquifers, so that would be.
Yeah, I can certainly pose that question to Board of Health, or you can contact the local Board of Health as well. They would probably be able to answer that question more specifically. But I think to Laura's point, just an overall approach of being aware of your water usage and being less dependent on maybe being focused on the aesthetics and more focused on the resource areas. I mean, the resources that we have in town and the use of them. I think that's more of, even if it's not impacting you directly, I think that's a better outlook, I would say.
What was your name was?
Cindy Pulaski.
I just want to make sure that we get to, can you spell your last name?
Yeah, Pollasgri.
And at the end of it, send your email along. If we get an answer to that, we can answer directly
Okay.
to you. That kind of thing, and like share it with everybody here as well.
Yes.
Maya Parekh, South Bolton Road. To further Laura's comments would also be use of fertilization and pesticides, and it ending up in our water supply. I think we're already seeing it in spots, but how to explain to people that it is a shared water supply and everything you put into it, we're all drinking.
Right. So again, back to the education. I think, and that's something that sounds like no matter what we talk about regarding vulnerability, it's really educating and providing specific information, but the information from the right resources. So you're not finding out about it from probably someone you trust, maybe online or Googling it yourself, but you know that, okay, the town's provided us these resources, it's posted on the town website. We know that these are either state statistics or information that we can trust and depend on to make our own judgment call, and then to educate the public as well on best management practices for water usage, fertilizer, pesticide, herbicide use, and managing your property individually, let alone at the town level.
Sharon Chapala, yeah. I think we have a lot of educational challenges. And during the drought, I remember hearing people say, well, it's my well. You know, what have they done to make their well go dry? Okay? And okay, I come from farming people.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to know about water underground, but a lot of folks move here from cities and are used to turning on the tap.
Yep.
And getting as much water as they want. And we'll also, I think, have to do education, education to bring people into the mindset that we are all in this together.
Right.
And that my behavior affects maybe not you immediately, but all of us together have responsibilities. And I think that part of our challenge is going to be to say the small things that each of us do are important for the health of the planet, not just Bolton.
Right.
And we will have to deal with issues of people, of suggesting to people, and maybe in some cases requiring of people behaviors that infringe on their sense of it's my property, I can do whatever I want with it. And I think that's a really tricky but terribly important thing to be able to get across. And I think we'll need to have a lot of conversations to gradually bring that mindset to people.
And I would 100% agree with you. Certainly, in my position, I apologize, but I didn't say in the beginning, I'm the conservation administrator for the town of Bolton. So it's my job to be communicating sometimes difficult things that people may or may not want to hear. We also have one of our Concom members here, Jeffrey Bryan,
We have
as
another
well.
one here too. He's sitting in the
And
back.
another member in the back hiding. And we do have those difficult conversations, just like any board member, or even just you in your personal lives talking to friends or having a casual conversation about it. And it is, you're not gonna change everyone's mind, but certainly looking at how can the town, again, going back to the adaptation and resiliency specific to climate change and the different things that we're seeing, it's maybe honing in on what would impact these people the most, or even someone who is completely understanding of what's going on and they just, it's their property, they can do what they want. That's why we have bylaws and regulations, and that's why we want to be having these conversations, so that as we're working towards updating those bylaws and regulations, we can say, we had input from the majority of the community or from community members to be able to make accurate decisions that benefit the town as a whole and also the greater community as well. There was a mention too about land acquisition, or rather just the protection of land. For the past 2 years, we have been doing a free management workshop with Sudbury Valley trustees, the local Bolton Conservation Trust, and AgCom to encourage individuals and give them those correct resources in terms of managing their land for agriculture or forestry, or specifically as open space, and trying to really start, again, the dialogue and start opening people to, well, what if this isn't here? Or what if we have a big storm? Or what if we have a development come in, and what is this going to look like? What are the impacts going to be on our natural resources, along with our built environment as well? We also started working on the neighborhood outreach program, which is our second year as well, and that's focusing on corridors within the town of Bolton. Right now we're working on Wilder Road. Before we were working on Wattaquatic. And again, the specific outreach to those neighborhoods, or that's what we have in Bolton. We really don't have too many big neighborhoods, but your road's your neighborhood. And trying to provide, again, the information you need to make educated decisions on your own, but also information that's coming from a valid resource, not just, you know, someone said this and they told me this isn't great, and making sure that we're all getting the same information so we can make those informed decisions. You have a question?
Yeah, I had a question and a comment.
Okay.
The comment is, I learned what I did from, it used to be called the ELF program in the school, and it's still going on now. I learned so much by volunteering in the schools doing that, and kids are a great way to reach parents.
Yes, I agree.
So if the schools could, I don't think there's anything at the high school level, but like, I remember my daughter at Neshoba taking a gen science class, and she was like, oh, this is so boring, it's pest management. And I told her about how the farmers, like when we had gone on field trips, said that they did selective pest management, and they would trap the bugs and then just spray for those particular bugs. And she said, why aren't we learning that in school? That's interesting, that's exciting. So I don't know if we have the resources to like either get the teachers to work with the conservation committee, or like have somebody from conservation go in and talk to some of the science classes. Because I think if kids are going home and telling their parents, like we learned this in school, and you spraying pesticides around our yard or putting rat poison out, this is what we learned could happen, and maybe parents would be more open to some of that. So that was one comment. And then the other was, is anybody from conservation on that mosquito like spraying?
Me.
Because I knew that like initially the people that were on were very pro spraying, and I was hoping there would at least be some kind of a balance. Do you think it is balanced?
I do think that.
Okay.
And I'll get to that second
Okay.
part in a second.
Okay.
But specific to the education and focusing around kids, that's a huge proponent of what I've been doing for the few years that I've been in the town of Bolton. We do water testing with Tom Denny Nature Camp, along with just opening up to the community members, and it's basic water testing, but just getting them involved, getting them out in the field, and really looking at, okay, what makes this interesting? What's out there? What can I do is it just water flowing by? There might be fish in it, but what else makes it livable? And we try and not only make it fun, but also educate them at the same time beyond just, okay, we're outside having a ball, which luckily normally they have fun. We also do World Water Day. I do a reading and then a STEM activity with them. We've done water testing before. We've always added in a couple tidbits about Bolton specifically, whether it be regulatory, whether it be resources we have beyond, and then connecting it back to the reading that we've done. We also do a reading on World Water Day as well. So that's April and March. So we do try and reach out, at least I've tried to reach out to the younger generations to try and get them involved. If their parents attend, great, and they're normally the ones that are asking the questions or saying, oh, when we do the little trivia questions, I didn't know that, or they ask a couple clarification questions, and it's excellent because then not only am I giving the information to the young kids and providing a fun environment to do it, but also, like you said, getting the adults involved as well so that they're questioning or they're talking to their kids about it when they go home. Regarding the, oh, and before I switch, I apologize, our vernal pool study in terms of certification of our vernal pools throughout town, we will be working with Minutemen School this year, and they'll be coming out to do some of our certifications.
How do you sign up for that if you know if you want them to look at a particular vernal pool?
You can email me.
Okay.
I'm still waiting to hear how many individuals they have working on it to see if they can split into more than one place in town. But we have at least 2 to 3 in at least 2 locations now. But certainly let me know and we'll add it to the list.
If you're in an area that, it seems to be a vernal pool, but it seems to be wet year round.
Yep.
Is that still considered a vernal pool?
It may be.
Okay.
It's worth looking into, I'll
Yeah.
put it that way.
This is definitely, because it has a huge frog population.
Yes.
so.
Huge frog, it probably is.
So regarding the mosquitoes, speaking of vernal pools and frogs.
Is that a huge
Frog.
frog or?
We have started
Large
It's a
frogs.
different-
They're large frogs and many of them.
we have started the Mosquito Response Committee, which has met twice. And we are doing quite a bit of research on, like Cindy, right?
Yes.
Like Cindy was saying, we are looking into what resources are out there, what's the problem, and we're hoping to come up with ultimately a reactive and proactive plan or set of criteria to then implement if necessary. And these can be like nature-based solutions, whether it be addressing stormwater systems that aren't maintained as well as they should be. I brought up, and I sort of jokingly say it because it was jokingly brought up in a meeting. I had some representatives from DEP and other conservation administrators that a well-functioning vernal pool, we'd actually see less mosquito larvae and less mosquitoes. It's true. It's not a joke, but unfortunately because of other things that impact our vernal pools and wetland resource areas, they're not perfectly functioning and well-balanced enough to take on a mosquito problem, if you want to see it that way.
Import frogs.
Yeah, exactly.
Dragonflies.
Yes. Yeah, and those are controls, so still nature-based solutions in a sense. Yes.
I just wanted to say that Roundup is still bad news.
Yes.
And, 50 years ago, Rachel Carson discovered that, and we're still not addressing the issue.
The other, I think one of the most important factors in my education in conservation was the Conservation Trust and people down there, 4 of you, who taught me about recycling. It was a community activity, and they made it clear that was right here, Alice and the crowd, that we had to do this as a community.
Yeah.
And it was very powerful, I thought. We hadn't done it in a while, I don't think. At least I haven't been exposed to it. But it's a community educational process. And every time you went to the dump, you were taught how to recycle. And it was important, you know, because we were still kind of, you know, not very good at it and had to be trained. But it was that whole aspect of being led by folks who really know what's going on and can bring us and teach us was incredibly important. Now, that's been a long time ago, I'll grant you. But to me, I think it's one of the most important things that we could do.
I would agree. So the community outreach and education, and then in addition to implementing it and continuing the education as it's being implemented.
Having it come up from the grassroots.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm Paula Berg.
Thank you.
Laura had brought up the drought situation that we had a few years ago, and I remember during that drought, I don't remember seeing anything like a watering ban. What options does the town have for, say, having a watering ban, or a spraying ban, or the use of pesticides, some sort of ability to ban certain things? Is there any?
So I can address that a little. I was on the water committee for the 6 months it
Could you
existed.
tell your name?
Maya Parekh. Do you need me to spell it?
MIA.
No.
Go ahead.
That was a yes.
M-A-Y-A.
M-A-Y-A,
Yes.
and last name?
P as in Peter.
Yep.
A-R-E-A-H.
Thank you.
The town doesn't really have anything in place that allows them currently to put a water ban. They can notify, and we do belong to a larger watershed, so to speak, that central Massachusetts that puts out warnings. And so the recommendation of that committee was that the selectmen vote to at least put placards up, you know, like out in Houghton and stuff like that, that just warn people that this is what's going on. It's, to go back to what Sharon says, it's private water supply. Even though we share it, you can only warn people, you know, so there are very few towns in the state that have private water well supplies that that have any, you would have to pass a bylaw in order to actually have a town warning system.
And then as far as pesticides, and herbicide use, the town does not encourage that use. I believe it was the board of selectmen that made that decision. The Concom obviously backed it. And this was again before I had started here, but that's been the practice and the continued practice. I think it's a case-by-case basis. If there were a substantial issue, that they would bring it back into the conversation to address it. But as far as going beyond stating it's not encouraged within the town and we don't use it on municipal properties, I can't really
There's no
answer.
enforcement.
On private property, I don't know what that would be in terms of the enforcement.
That's come up at some of the meetings when we talked about what goes on at some of the golf courses,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And I'm not sure if we've ever, we've talked about it.
We've
but
brought up that conservation
yeah, I know.
commission meetings. We've had an individual come in from Ocean Access.
Right.
And he spoke about what options there are and providing us with information. We requested him to send us brochures on that information. Unfortunately, he didn't follow through with that. I don't know why, but we were really hoping to get that information so then we can send it all out or provide it on an online platform so that people can access it more readily. Because the individual that came in was speaking about towns that did ban it and were having, they've documented it previously and monitored the water resource areas to show that yes, in fact, these are where the sources were coming from, or these were the sources for the pollution in the waterways, and it was fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and chemical testing to provide that information, and then as a result, they had said no more pesticides, no more use of this, or had lowered it to a percentage where it would not impact the waterways. So some towns do that, but not every town, and it's very difficult to monitor exactly where it's coming from, specific to like a pond, for instance. If you have one property doing it or having an excess of nutrients coming off their property, and no one else is doing anything, then you can pinpoint it. But if everyone's doing the same thing, it's hard to say, you know, this person's causing more damage than the next. You're all impacting the water resource area, not just that one. So that's sort of the enforcement side of it, yes.
In terms of pollution, starting in March and going through maybe September, October,
Yep.
we get inundated with flyers from various companies that want you to have a good lawn, and no dandelions, no this, that, and the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way that the town could put out something that sort of counteracts that and says you may have a green lush lawn, but you may be killing all the trout in the trout stream?
So that's a good idea, and that's actually.
I've got that down as something that we should follow up on and
Yeah.
get out there, because just my, anecdotally, I'm a big, I don't like Roundup at all. I don't think it in the community garden over here
There
where
are
it's
$1 billion
done.
worth of seats right now.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
I'm sure they do, but some of the lawn care people who come around just want to make the grass green. They put down nitrates that make it green, and it runs off into the water supply. And if we are talking about water, you know, basically as one of the big environmental things going on in this town, what we feed into that water is also something that we should pay attention to. So if you do have a lawn service, if you're lucky enough to have lawn service, I have my own lawn service, but if you're lucky enough to have them and they want to put stuff on your lawn, then you should make sure that that you know what's going on there. It's not going to affect what's going on.
I have a question. When somebody comes in and proposes a housing development, they have to talk about the septic and
Yes.
things. Is there any requirement for them to outline what aquifers they're going to take the well water from, and what the drawdown, what the proposed drawdown would be if they're going to have a 5-bedroom house or a 4-bedroom house? What the potential drawdown for that aquifer would be?
In a sense, be careful how I answer this because I don't want to answer it incorrectly. We look at the impact to resource areas. So on that form, they have to provide any disturbance. And that includes, in the stormwater report, it talks about the stormwater systems and the septics and all the excellent stuff that they're engineering and putting into it. But in terms of specific to the aquifer, no. But what I look at when I'm reviewing the new proposals, I'm going on and I'm looking at soils, I'm looking at the New England wetlands inventory, and I'm looking at where our aquifers are in the town of Bolton and how close they are to it in terms of sitting right on top or next to or adjacent to, just for my understanding of what resource areas are actually there. That's part of my job when we get any application in. So although they're not providing that information, that's something I'm looking into anyways, but in terms of specific drawdown numbers, I wouldn't say so. But I think to that point, if it's impacting it, then it would be a DEP, it'd be a bigger issue than the town, I would say. But I don't know exactly the answer to that question.
It would be a good, I mean, that's a good proposal.
Yeah.
More data, I'm a scientist. More data.
But the Conservation Commission does do an excellent, in my opinion, I'm on it, so I'm saying. But I think we do a great job protecting the wetlands. And, you know, there are boundaries and setbacks and things like that that people have to pay attention to. And I hope there's not a developer here, but those developers like to skip over those things like crazy. And we've spent a lot of time, you know, a lot of pushback on that. So it's important to know that the wetlands that we do protect do affect the water that's in the ground because they soak it up. They, you know,
So
help.
more the recharge than
Yeah.
the drawdown.
I guess that would be a good way to
She's,
summarize it.
she's like the sheriff.
So it wasn't just wetlands, so it's also, clear cutting, taking all
Well,
the trees off,
that's-
which is also.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
Just let us answer that.
Going back a couple comments, I thought, at least I followed, that we have a bylaw that says you can't put fertilizer or, and I include lime in that, within X number of feet of the wetlands.
So-
Wells.
Yes and no. I can't speak for any other department in terms of the bylaws and regulations, but for our wetland permits that we're issuing, the orders of conditions and then orders of conditions in perpetuity, once they receive the certificate of compliance, once the home is built, or the addition is built, the development is built, we include within those conditions in perpetuity that they cannot be spraying pesticides, fertilizers. There are some permits that I've found in the filing cabinet that do not have those conditions. They didn't carry over into the certificate of compliance, but that's what we've been doing, is carrying it over so that we have something enforceable to point to that holds weight and says, no, this is recorded with your deed, you can't be doing this.
But I thought,
Yeah.
I mean, because my house is much too old to be included in that sort of thing. I thought we had, and obviously I'm probably wrong, but I thought we had a general bylaw for everyone, pre-existing and new construction,
Yeah.
that you weren't supposed to apply fertilizers within 200 feet of the wetlands. I mean, it goes along, I think, with the
So-
same idea of composting within 200
Yeah, so
feet
you're
of the
not gonna-
wetlands. You know,
Our bylaws state it's a no disturbance area, so a prohibition area within the first 25 feet from a resource area, 100 feet is an adjacent upland resource area, 200 feet from riverine areas is your riverfront act application, so riverfront area, inner riparian, outer riparian. So in those areas, no, you wouldn't be applying that. But that's more talking about the disturbance to those resource areas. And in our bylaw, it does state and talking about applications and fertilizers, but it's a one-liner that does get strengthened by the fact that you're not supposed to be disturbing those areas without going before your Concom to ask. And at least since I've been here, there's been no circumstance where we've said, okay, you can spray whatever you want, use as much fertilizer as you want on this property.
Is Lancaster worked with Bolton on Bolton Flats when that all floods to warn people not to go down 117? Or, I mean, I know you can't drain it, but it's got to go down the river, which takes time. But has anybody considered working with them to see what, anything could be done?
Yeah, so that is a very good point. We're lucky enough to be able to outreach and collaborate with neighboring towns. Rona knows specifically because of the Wild and Scenic Stewardship Council that we both sit on behalf of the town. We're working with the Natural River Watershed Association to work on various projects, whether it be education and outreach, or specific to the river itself, whether it be implementing a project that creates better infrastructure, access to the river, along with some historical mapping that we're initiating. But in terms of the flooding and notice and awareness, that's definitely something I can look into, but as far as what's going on now, I'm not sure, but to me, that would be more of something that the police or fire may be doing, or Department of Public Works, since it would be impacting the public roadway. But regarding creating resiliency for problems in the future, it's Bolton Flats, it's a low-lying area. We have a lot of beaver activity there, but because the makeup and the topography, again, being so flat and so level, there's really not too much you can do aside from expanding the floodplain, but we have houses and the public roadway there that we do have to worry about. So I can ask the police and fire and Department of Public Works and see what's in place.
When it goes way up.
Right.
Those houses all along here,
Yeah.
and it flooded.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll ask what we have in place. I know Jeff got everyone's emails, so,
Yeah, well, if I don't, I'd like to have your email.
yeah, I can send it out.
Bank accounts and social security.
No, we don't do that.
Planning on retiring.
So that's where I'm gonna swing us into emergency preparedness. We talk about flooding, we're talking a lot about how do we communicate, not only the educational aspect of it, but how do we communicate there's a problem going on, or maybe before a problem happens, these are the areas we're susceptible to whatever comes through, whether it be, again, the storm damage, whether it be from pests or disease, carried by pests potentially. What would benefit you all, or what would you think the public would benefit from either hearing, or what modes of communication do you access most frequently?
Can I suggest, along with education that has really impacted Bolton in the primary school system with 4 winds, and I find it fascinating, and I hear it again and again, that it impacts the kids and give them a better understanding of their local environment, but frankly, it gives the parent volunteers even more understanding of local environment. Is there not a reason why a similar approach could be used in high school? I find high school students remarkably naive about their community and the underlying causes of, for instance, the elements that make Bolton or any other community susceptible to climate change. Whether that could be put into basic understanding of water, behavior of water, aquifers, et cetera, rational runoff, that sort of thing, in an earth science course. I'm sure there's something, probably an elective course that could be taught, but it seems to me that if we're going to provide high school students with other than political perspectives on things, it's really, really key to give them a reasonable grounding and a basic understanding of what we're talking about. So at this point, I think one of the best ways to get people to learn about climate change, both the implications and the mitigation, is to get out there and start teaching them about the basics.
I would agree.
The other thought is, and this is an economic thought, when you take a look at coastal areas, and most egregious example is the Jersey Shore with Superstorm Sandy, that as better understanding of rational runoff, and particularly the shore, but it's not just the shore, it's us up here too. The HUD floodplains continues to move around.
Yes.
And it will move around even more as insurance companies and the Eastern Insurance Pool in particular realize what their liabilities are. They're going to want to mitigate their liabilities by expanding the HUD floodplain. And I think that's something we need to think about in siting homes.
Yes.
That it's not just, X distance from the wetlands, it's what happens when the real one hits, the 1,000-year flood or the 100-year flood or whatever. We seem to have several 100-year floods every couple of years. And we ought to think about that from both an insurance perspective, as somebody who is faced with very substantial flood insurance. Think about preventing that from occurring by making sure that residences aren't put in positions that are susceptible to very large flooding. So I think we ought to kind of start thinking about that. I'm not sure at this point that we have the information we need in terms of projecting it, but you certainly can take a look at the 1,000-year flood, which is now the 500-year flood. Probably in 10 years will be the 100-year flood, and start thinking about not only the zoning, the flat map zoning perspective with the wetlands requirements overlaid on that, but the real climate change risk element of siting homes and businesses in zoned permitted areas.
So we, being the conservation administrator, we're a member of a few different organizations, MACC, which is the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissions. We're also a member of MSMCP, which is the Municipal Conservation Professionals in Massachusetts. So these are things that we talk about all the time. Sometimes we have DEP representatives come in, we have watershed representatives come in, which we are actually split between the Suwasco and the Nashville watershed. So we have more resources, but at the same time, we also have seemingly more problems or more things to think about as we're addressing these issues. And one thing that always comes up is exactly what Bob's talking about, is how do we address these longer term, seemingly longer term issues, but realistically, they're happening now. One of which I've heard from a representative that works with FEMA, Joy Duperal, that they're working on new maps that aren't so black and white. So there's not going to be a hard line anymore that says, you know what, your floodplain stops here, nothing's gonna go beyond it, or basically giving that perception, which is very difficult, especially in my position, in the commission's position, when we're trying to educate the applicant on, well, think about what can happen. You're in a low area here, it's not just stopping, it's too gradual, it's going to continue to come if we get those heavier storms or bigger storm surges. And they're looking at the requirement that's saying, nope, I just have to meet the 100-year floodplain or be outside of this area. And that's what we're faced with, trying to relay that information to regulatory standard. But now they're looking at creating more of a transitional mapping system, so it's not going to be that hard line. So that conversation will become a little bit more fluid in terms of communicating that to the public. Also, other towns seem to be, there are permitting projects because they're including that in their regulations, that it's a requirement to plan for the 500-year storm versus the 100-year storm, which is proactive and beneficial. And that's something I would agree that we need to be working on outside of even just the Conservation Commission and providing education. I think the maps that they're updating, they said, are about a year or two out. I don't have the exact date, but that's something that comes up regularly. So it's not just myself, it's obviously residents that are thinking of it, and also other conservation professionals, and at the state level, realizing that this is an issue, even of sharing of information, because now it seems like we're only giving half of the story and holding people to that half a story instead of projecting it out into what the actual longer term issue is. Regarding the educational aspect in the high schools, and I apologize for not addressing that because I know you had mentioned it for about a second before you were talking about the younger kids. I've reached out because I also, again, am a huge proponent of education because that solves half of the problems. That's half the battle, making sure people have the resources they need to make that good, informed decision. I've reached out to one of the professors at the high school who has an interest in conservation and forestry, and tried to encourage them to get on that site, or what project can you work on. I'm going to be looking at vernal pools, I'm going to be doing some water testing. Do you think the students can come out? And it's not, it at least seems with that individual or that teacher, professor, I guess, it's not that there's zero interest in it, it's the restrictions that they're held to, or maybe the liability because of the school system. So maybe the answer would be I speak to someone higher up, or I'll communicate with their town administrator and see what, maybe we'll be able to coordinate something.
Is there earth science course taught in high school?
I don't know.
Yes,
if there is.
there
I would
is.
assume so, though.
Okay, so,
But it's been
you know, it'd be
changed.
great to have the Historical Society teach about local history,
Yeah.
history classes, and by the way, teach the local elements and the underlying issues associated with climate change in earth science courses. Where hopefully they are teaching aquifer and recharge and all the other nice things.
I would hope.
And seriously important part.
There's an important thing. This is where we need to then go talk to the school board, because the school board has, there used to be an environmental science course which was offered as a freshman level course.
Yep, always has been.
Which is a wonderful place to get them. It is now only offered to seniors.
As an
So
elective.
we kind of get them on the way out instead of catching them now. And I think we could do a little Greta Thunberg on them and say the house actually is on fire, and perhaps this instead of physics for the freshman class might be something that is going to capture more children and their interests as young people are becoming somewhat more aware. But I'm kind of tuned into several different layers in the high school, and it's amazing how unaware our kids are.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, I have two sons who just recently graduated from the high school, and Tim Kastner, who's one of the teachers there, he actually he recommended a course, a science class, that had a climate element to it. And they piloted the class, and unfortunately, didn't have enough kids sign up to keep it going, which was very depressing. But he has spent a lot of time thinking about ways of integrating some of the elements of that into some of the other science classes going on. But there's the teacher that teaches one of the earth science classes lives right here in Bolton, and hit upon a lot of the things you're talking about. You might be reassured to know, because my son came home and told me all about it. Mom, you'd be glad to know he really belongs in the Bolton logo, and and repeated back to me things that I've been talking about. So there are a couple of teachers in there in the science. I
But if
don't
there's
know how
not,
we
the only way to
institutionalize
get
it.
interest
And
is to have, and I've just been through this, is to get very interested students to simply tell, first of all, the district, and more importantly, the school board, that this is what needs to happen and this is why. My friend Rita feels very strongly about this, and by the way, the Eastern Insurance Pool is gonna suck the money out of your hide when you see what the 500-year flood does and the map does to your insurance premiums. And it's not small. I mean, it's easily $6,000 per house when you're, it's big stuff. Now, I think the real reason should be understanding it, what the implications are to the community. But like all things, insurance drives regulation.
Right. Another opportunity, just while we're talking about the high school, is I know they're always looking for volunteers around Earth Day to do programs in their cafeteria to engage, capture some students coming by. And regarding water, a few years ago, when Bolton did participate in the Earth Day program, we had Bolton well water. We did a blind water test and had students going by, take a sip of, Poland Springs, Bolton water, and something else. And Bolton water won, actually. We published, the results of the principal announced it over the speaker. It's a hard audience to catch, but anyways, I just thought I'd mention it because if you had a cool, nifty thing, it might be a way to catch some student interest to find the Greta that's at the school.
I think it is important to note that even though I do believe it should be taught throughout the grades, I guess, going up, whether you're a senior, freshman, or in elementary school, but just from personal experience, a quick tidbit, I only started into it and because I was given the opportunity and quite honestly fought for the opportunity to be an environmental science course that was only offered to certain students. And that's what really sparked my interest, was being offered that opportunity or getting that opportunity as a senior in high school. So it is beneficial, even though it's not taught, at least right now, we can still say at least one grade is being taught it, and maybe we'll spread the word. But I've actually spoke to Tim Kastner, that's the teacher that I've been in communications with on other things as well, but trying to see where students can get involved. Also, I know the honors students need to make up certain community hours, whether it be on conservation projects or not. I'm not sure exactly what drives what type of project they're doing, but we've had 2 so far that help out from land stewardship side and then also some regulatory side as well. So there is involvement being pushed, but I also want to go back to Bob's comment about community involvement. I had a conversation with someone around my age not too long ago, and there's this fear of if they get too involved with the community, then they may be seen differently, and it's all about the perception of who they are. But I think that plays into community involvement from the younger generations as well, whether they're high schoolers, whether they're college age or not, or even some people who range older than I am. I think there's a lack of an understanding of what it is to be part of the community in more of a standing than just attending events and learning more about the community. That's excellent, but also serving on town boards, learning about why there are certain regulatory standards, and being able to have a valid conversation with these regulatory boards about what's necessary, or coming to these meetings and talking about it. I think there's a disconnect there, and I don't know the solution yet for getting people or helping them to get over that that fear or perception.
Can you expand on that? The
Sure.
fear of the perception?
Sure.
Their perception by the community?
I was told by one person recently, but throughout my time serving on local Concom and in the field that I'm in, dealing with different things, and it's a perception of, or it's a opinion. So the person who has the fear or concern is that they are concerned with another person in the community's perception of them as they're voicing their opinion about something that may not be the universal idea.
Bob,
And
I'll
that's-
expand on that a little.
Yeah.
I'm known as the crazy water lady at the school, you know, who told other mothers not to water and fertilize their lawns. So, and I've had mothers walk across the room away from me. So, you know, I can understand why people don't do it.
And I understand as well, but
It's a shame.
it is, and I try to encourage, because of my experiences, whether they're good or bad, not in Bolton specifically, but serving on my hometown's board, and trying to communicate, you know, I'm surprised why other individuals my age or younger aren't participating, because that's how things are gonna be solved. I understand people work, obviously, and that's sometimes their schedule conflicts with public meetings, but there's still opportunities to get involved, and I don't think I don't know the advertisement that you need to do to collect the amount of participation you need to have people get over that hump. Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious with towns around us.
What's your name, please?
Sarah Garrett.
Oh, yes.
Daisy's on
Oh,
our
yes.
Have any of the towns that are around us, or that are similar to us, have any success in communications or getting these kind of programs out there and getting people to listen? Do we know of any successful stories?
What's your rate of success would be my question.
One person, what do we need to have that success? Where can we start, whether it's, do we see successful high school programs
Mhm.
to be able to drive that message? Do we see anything within the community that can drive everyone else to start listening instead of being called heavy tree huggers? And things like that.
The Boy Scouts were involved in a couple of projects
Yeah.
that had to do with the Trails Committee and conservation. And they're always looking for, Eagle Scout projects that do revolve around that. And one of the things I'm taking away from this conversation is that maybe we should try to get, some sort of couple of programs going on that could drag not drag, but teenagers you have to drag. But, bring some of the kids in to try and teach them a little bit about, you know, what's going on. I actually had a thought here that maybe we should do a vernal pond tour for the kids, just to, and there was a couple of experts at a couple of the meetings that talked about educating them about what goes on in a vernal pond, or what goes on in some of these conservation areas. So that's what I'm taking out of this conversation, is that it might be good to start them in the freshman and sophomore year as opposed to senior when they're just trying to get
They're
out of
over it,
college
yeah.
and out from under their moms and dads. But
Is the green team still at the high school? The green team? Because they had a very active recycling, gardening group over there for the longest time, and I don't know if
She
they're.
did, I think it's called something else now.
It's called something else
Yeah,
now?
I think
Okay, and they're doing a lot of sustainability projects and.
There's the Interact group, but I'm not sure.
Right, I think the thing that was called
If they're
Green
up there.
Team got
Called-
renamed something
oh,
else.
okay.
Lives Tim Kastner.
Right, Tim
Yeah.
Kastner
And
is
that's
the person
actually
who's
a really
like.
good thing, that's outside of classes,
Right.
so
Yeah.
that's like a club.
Yep.
And
they do need
had some
that.
fun
They do
projects.
need some of those things to get into
Yeah.
college, right? They have to.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that was the ability to have some community service hours, but a lot of it, you know, the kids would plan some things over at the high school, they did some gardening. I know that they were doing, my daughter was on it, and I remember her hauling giant bags of plastic bottles and cans, and so they did fundraising by turning those things in, and they did paper drives and a number of things like that.
So something that I know Boylston was looking into was working with students from, I believe it was WPI, and using the Goff House, which is a historical building there, as a part research facility in a sense. So looking at the resources that they have in the town and then connecting it to the building that's there, but in the sense that they're using it as a facility, not necessarily the history of the structure, but you sort of have to know the history of the structure by just going there. And I think that's another resource that isn't used enough, because I know going through university, you have to do internships, or you have a thesis. There are all these opportunities to be reaching out to your local community, to be looking into the natural resources, or even the built environment, or stormwater, and that doesn't seem to be harnessed, and I'm not sure why or how we could harness that.
I just wanted to go back to this idea that people are afraid to become known as an advocate or a crazy or something. Passionate. Yes, that's another way of saying it. I
All my
look
favorite
at
people are crazy.
Outlook, I look at next door, and in Harvard, they have very energetic discussions. Not only in terms of water, mowing the lawns, the whole deer eradication program they had, but they just approved deer hunting.
On conservation land.
With bows and arrows, but there's a dialogue, there's a conversation.
Yes.
There's a back and forth. And that's one that I happen to notice, we don't have that kind of dialogue, at least I don't see it.
Stowe, I think Stowe is
It's-
more progressive
Yeah.
Yeah,
than,
and I think-
like Harvard, I can't believe they appointed a committee, like a subcommittee, and there were hunters on it, and they got this through, and somebody got a petition up so they could have a special town meeting, but it passed. But they were using like scare tactics and whatever, and not just for saving the trees, but it'll reduce Lyme and like everything they could think of to get people to vote for it. But then Stowe had a wonderful write-up in the Bolton and Stowe paper about what they're doing, and it's so much more progressive. It's about selective cutting and letting light in and planting, looking ahead to with global warming, to trees that will survive global warming, and planting those kind of trees. And I'm just, like, even with wildlife, everything, I am so impressed suppressed with Stowe, like,
But Cindy, isn't that our problem? Why, I mean, you know, you
well,
might.
we're kind of neutral, I feel like, the town, but Stowe, Harvard, I feel like, is a little
Yeah.
aggressive, and Stowe is like on the,
Proactive.
yeah.
Proactive.
Stowe, I was just amazed at Stowe, like
Yeah.
when I've gone to their, like, forum on wildlife and
Yeah.
living with wildlife, their knowledge, how just progressive they are.
Yeah, they have a wonderful educational proponent to what they do in terms of providing outreach to the community, and that's something that, again, I don't know how many times I've repeated it, I'm a huge proponent of education, so any opportunity that I get to provide settings like this or other workshops, or trail walks, we do trail walks at the end of every month. We get a handful of attendees, except on New Year's Day, but those are the opportunities we're providing to the public to come. Let's take a walk with you, let's go talk about what our resources are. You briefly mentioned forest management indirectly. Whether you're talking about the deer's impact on the forest, or you're talking about the pests that deer might carry and transmit diseases, that's one method of conservation and management of those properties and stewardship of those properties. But it's voiced by the town in terms of how they want to manage that. So Stowe obviously has a different approach, and they're looking at increasing wind probably throughout the property. So that might be reducing pests on its own because everything's circulating differently and it's not allowing those areas to exist where disease-carrying pests may reside. But another aspect of that, talking about the deer again briefly, we need to know what resources are out there, whether it be wildlife or the impact on the forest, and then that gives us a better picture of what's impacting our forest. We did a baseline survey as well, same thing that Harvard did. We had Mass Wildlife come in, and they're professionals for deer and moose, and we walked multiple properties and assessed what is the condition, what's our deer population like, and they are very specific, and there is a science behind it to get those standards, but we didn't resolve to open it to hunting. It was an educational survey so that we can then bring it forward and talk to the commission, which we did, and say, this is what our results were. Is it at a threshold yet that it's necessary to do something more active than maybe more of a passive approach? Like, and that's really not, because even forestry is active, but not necessarily impacting the wildlife, but impacting the forest makeup instead. And we haven't yet finished that analysis, but it's still based on that same data. So Harvard just chose one method, Stowe chose another. One day we're gonna have to choose one, and we'll see what it is, but
Well, and
we
town-
also have great, I left a pamphlet over there, feel free to look at it. It's about forest carbon. There's also a lot of great webinars, or a website called masswoods.org. And that has an exponential amount of resources that are great for providing both an understanding of forest management, whether it's passive or more aggressive, whether it's short-term or long-term.
That you're talking about, would the town get to vote? Like, I feel like even with mosquito, like if we join the Mosquito Control Project,
Yeah.
or
So if we had a
if
board
hunting
meeting, it
would
would-
be allowed, like Harvard wasn't gonna bring it to a town vote. It took somebody getting a petition to bring it to town vote,
And by town vote, you're talking about.
they had
meeting?
a special town meeting, yeah.
So it still has to be addressed during a Concom meeting, Board of Selectmen meeting, Board of Health, whatever venue it's initiating through. I don't know if that's the right way to state it. But it would be a town vote to that.
So you
sense.
wouldn't
It would
just
be-
enact something
No.
on your own?
No, not at
without-
that large of a scale, but also, even if I come up with an idea I think is awesome, and yeah, we should go for it full force, after even doing research, I still have to go to the commission. They're the ones who are authorizing me to carry out or start looking into something, or they're saying, yes, we want to move forward with this, let's look into it a little bit more. And that's the same with Board of Selectmen, the same with all the boards throughout the town as well. So it's not just one person, and with subcommittees, they have to go back and report to the board that they
And then it
report
would
to.
go to town vote. I guess
So
I just
town,
want to
not
make
everything
sure-
goes to town meeting.
Well, I mean, like to town, yeah, because some of those decisions, and I mean, in the past, this has nothing to do with conservation, but unstaffing the police department, that was made without us voting on it.
It was
And,
financial, it was a financial.
It went to town meeting. It did, it was
It
talking
not
about staff expenses.
unstaffing, it was going regional came
Yeah.
to town meeting, but then it was decided outside of town meeting not to staff, it, not have 24-hour staff there.
So I can't speak for that public safety building, but when it comes to finances or budgeting, that goes to town meeting. So it may not have been that you saw that or that it was required to, but should
Yeah, I
have most
even
likely
talked
made
to
the
one of the
connection.
selectmen, and he
Yeah.
told me they made the decision.
They may know. But I'm just gonna connect back because we're sort of
Yeah,
running
yeah.
away. Yeah, Laura's going to talk about just a couple examples in surrounding towns that so again, I stated we applied to the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. I'm really hoping we have some good news today, but we're still waiting on that. So to be continued, but in the meantime, this is initiation of this conversation of adaptation, resiliency, what the town needs, what are our vulnerabilities. It sounds like communications, water management, floodplain management, communication, I already said communication, nature-based solutions, notice to the public regarding emergency states. I didn't hear anyone even touch upon agricultural resiliency, which is a little concerning to me, but I also understand maybe not everyone's thinking of that every day. But Laura's going to just touch upon what other communities are doing that border Bolton that have already started going through this planning process.
And before I do that, I do just want to say, we spent a significant amount of time in our last Bolton local meeting talking about trees and a little bit of agriculture, just in terms of, that is a concern, just no one raised it yet tonight.
Yeah.
There are people here that are concerned about that. But Rebecca and I and the commission met in December, yes?
Mhm.
And we thought it would be a good idea to look at what other towns around us have done. And Sarah, you raised the question, what are other towns doing about outreach? So Rebecca reached out to a number of towns around us. Stowe, Hudson, and Clinton responded with, because they were ahead of us on this road of coming up with a master vulnerability plan. So we have their kind of highlights of their top things they're doing. So the town of Stowe, these are their top 4 recommendations. Apparently there was a very lively meeting co-hosted by the planning and fire departments, and they worked with an outside consultant, and they were supposed to come up with top 3 initiatives, but they came up with 4. The first one was conduct a water supply vulnerability assessment and educate the public on water supply. So the education is the theme through these. Update the hazard mitigation plan in their town. Develop a hazard transportation and communication plan. And the last one was develop programs to increase resiliency of the farming community. So this was Stowe's top 4 list. The town of Hudson, they actually took a slightly different approach and have kind of high, medium, low categories. The high priority action items, their top one here is community preparedness networks. Develop a community outreach program to plan to identify individuals. They have kind of 4 little subcategories in each one, and one of them is engage in a community-wide climate change education initiative. So the education theme weaves through all of these. There's another high priority action around open space and recreation. Medium priority actions around the built infrastructure. And they kind of touch upon a number of different actions related to that. Consider locations for pavement reduction and planting opportunities for trees, native plants, and drought-tolerant plants. Coordinate with the fire department to establish an emergency command center. integrate climate planning into the existing municipal regulatory framework within Hudson. And their second medium priority action was around water management infrastructure. And then they had a couple, I think, they had a few low priority items or lower priority items. Oh, sorry, these are medium ones continued. Community preparedness networks, develop an emergency recovery plan, establish a 311 network, coordinate across multiple state and regional agencies to address local vulnerabilities and identify resources. And they also have open space and recreation and Assabet River management identified as medium priorities. Their lower priorities have to do with some specifics around, it's basically those same themes, just kind of the lower, sub-actions that they wanted to get to. But in the spirit.
What's a 311?
Let me see if it describes it. I assume it's some kind of community notification. Establish a 311 network, develop a municipal web-based application, and promote opportunities to sign up for updates and messaging on a variety of subjects.
Non-emergency.
So it's like a non-emergency communication, I guess.
One thing about Hudson as well, before we get into Clinton, is the feedback from their conservation administrator was that compared to Stowe and other towns, they had more of a general understanding of what their results or what their action items or goals were, where Stowe, as Laura read and you just heard, had 3 deliverables basically. And under those deliverables, they had a few things that they can start doing regarding action items that they can start on to reach those goals. Hudson was saying it was more of a blanket approach, but still listing action items, but again, not tying it back to those goals. And I think that's an important thing to note, because it was something that they felt they had a great process going through it. If they did it again, they would want to have that as an improvement.
Yeah, more actionable things they could do. She said that in the cover letter. That's a good point. And Clinton's, they have basically 6 high-level bucket areas. Counter pain, that is their top priorities. Counter pain, sorry, Clinton.
What was the top priority you said?
Counter pain work is number 1 in Clinton. Number 2 was emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. Number 3 was hazardous materials. Number 4 is water management and floodplain management. Number 5 was Nash Shore River management. And number 6 was renewable resources / carbon mitigation. And then they went through and also sort of prioritized their action items in terms of high, medium, and low. They fall in those buckets. So.
Or do you have a sense of how long it took each of those towns to do this? Was this a 3-month process with 16 meetings or?
So it's a pretty standard process, which hopefully, if we get the funds, we will be going through that same process. And it's a process that, once the application is submitted, you have until June or July. I can't remember off the top of my head, but so it's a couple months. They're going through this process. You're having the public meetings. I believe there's 2 larger workshops, something like this, where we have an MVP provider from the program come in and talk about it, ask specific questions, probably looking at a couple different maps, and asking individuals to come out, pulling out the circle, similar to the hazard mitigation plan process that we just went through not too long ago, to be able to accomplish, the community's providing the input, and then the output is these goals based on what the community has said. And then in addition to that, the action items that have been brought up throughout the process and echoed, again, throughout those meetings and from department heads as well. So part of the application submittal for the MVP planning grant, they encourage you to receive letters of support from departments. We received one from every department. We also received support from our regional planning council as well, and the National River Water Center Association, SOASCO. So we're reaching out to all the partners and collaborative entities that we typically work with, because once it comes down to it, like I said, it's a short time frame and it's relatively quick and accelerated, so you have to get the ball rolling right away. Does that answer your question? Okay. And I do want to touch upon, although we haven't completed the MVP program yet, fingers crossed, we have completed and picked up quite a few initiatives. Maya was talking about the water committee. What was the formal name of it again?
Water resources.
Water resources.
It was a subcommittee.
So
They disbanded it, right?
yes.
And they disbanded
Yeah.
it.
So just like that's a similar committee, like the mosquito response committee, it's formed for a period of time to collect data, provide information, and then most likely it'll disband, I would assume. So mosquito response committee is another initiative we've taken up to try and start dealing with some of these issues, whether it be the pests, managing the pests or the diseases that come with it that they may be carrying. And we've also updated the open space and recreation plan in 2017. We completed those updates, so that has a list of action items that we've been slowly chipping away at as well. The hazard mitigation plan I mentioned, similar process. We're pointing out the vulnerable areas, proposing solutions, and then that allows us to apply for various funding and then rank in those funding pools higher or lower depending on what plans and what mitigation measures we've already taken. I mentioned the neighborhood outreach program, so that's an educational opportunity that we've provided to the public for 2 years now, and our workshop that's partnered with Sudbury Valley trustees, that's another opportunity. And we have a wonderful, no one mentioned alternate modes of transportation, so I'm gonna put in a plug for our Bolton Trails Committee. We have an awesome and immense effort right now to be updating our trail maps. One of our experts is in the room, Gordon and Jeff, and our other members, there's Bob as well, who is provide an immense amount of resources and history for different properties. So again, that's community engagement, knowing what's out there, in addition to alternate modes of transportation, which Jeff brought up in the beginning of this conversation. We have buses. We have buses that run their routes and they pick up a handful of students, but there's still a huge line of residents being dropped off at the door. So what are we doing to reduce our emissions? And what are we doing to encourage, is there a way to encourage individuals to use public transportation? How do we do that? Or ride your bike or walk in circumstances. Or using the trails. The trail system is excellent.
They are trying to improve the sidewalks too in this town. If you notice
Yep.
that water aquatic, they're
So
working on
we have
it.
the
So
Complete
we'll,
Streets
instead
program.
of walking down 117 and getting run over by 18-wheelers, maybe they'll make it a
That's
little
not
safer. That's something different.
And Jeff's correct, and we're green community, we're working on our complete streets to allow those safer alternate modes of transportation as well. So I did want to just add those in as things that the town is working on, and there's a few more I'm sure that I'm
Can
forgetting.
I add one?
Yes, go ahead.
It's invisible, but it will become extremely visible in the near future. And that is, we're updating the master plan for the town. 18-month effort, be out mid-2021. It's 11 people on the steering committee. We have 14 subgroups. One of them is, in fact, climate change, but it goes. Yeah, Ken is another member. I'm the chair of it. Ken's the secretary. But another one is transportation. Transportation in a very, very broad sense. Regional transportation, various modes of transportation, the infrastructure that is necessary to support transportation, et cetera. So a lot of the work that's already been done in terms of climate risk, et cetera, municipal vulnerability will be one of them, are going to be rolled into that master plan. And then there will be an implementation plan. If I have anything to do with it, there will be an implementation team that makes sure that that happens. One of the problems we've had with the last one, I think everybody's tried to do their part, but the original implementation matrix for the last plan was not fully implemented. And I think that's, a plan is only as good as its real bottom line results. And I think this is going to be a pretty results-oriented team, and we'll come up with practical approaches, integrated approaches among the various elements of moving the town forward. And hopefully we'll have a plan in place that's practical and well communicated with the community and has the support of the community. So that, but again, a huge amount of work has already been done, and it's in process.
But also, we need help. And so if
Yes,
any of you in
good
this
plug for
room
that.
or anywhere else, or that you know, want to help out on any of the different task groups, we're trying to divide it into little pieces so that what you were saying doesn't happen, so you don't have to devote your 45 years in town to that subject. You can only work on it for however long you want.
Where can people get information about the different sections? On the town
We're gonna be-
website.
We're going to be publishing it, but
No, it is on the
Bob and I
town
and Fanny
website.
Gherkin.
It is now?
Yes. There is a master plan. But if I can be so bold as to get those email addresses,
Yeah,
I'll be glad to send out an overview of where it's going. And it'll be
Great.
How often is the master plan reevaluated?
Well, every 10 years.
It's around
2006 is the last
It's
one,
14
so-
years since, and that's one of the concerns. It's, like a lot of other things in this town, it's antique. And again, I say that tongue in cheek. A lot of work has been done on it. A lot of the recommendations, public safety, the library, a number of those really, really big items have been implemented, and that's been great. But there are a lot of other things that need to go forward, and it's not just finishing that off. It's a huge number of things have changed in town, and they need to be addressed now.
It's also worth mentioning that we're doing a survey. We're going to do a survey in the town to try to get views of the public so that we have a better sense of where the people are coming from and what they're interested in, what they're not interested in, and things like that. Those surveys have been very helpful in the past to guide the direction that we would be going, and so that's what we're planning. And that's going to come out fairly soon, so that will be a way that people will know what's going on and can, in that part, everybody can contribute to where we're going. We'll try to make some kind of presentation at town meeting if we can find a way to do that.
Yeah, so definitely looking on the town website for opportunities like participating in the master plan, serving on a town board. We have the senior tax rebate program where you can volunteer for the town and assist in a measure of ways. And then there's also other opportunities, whether you're just coming in and you want to help out with the trails or you want to help out with planning. And I'm sure other departments as well, you can assist that way. But talking about the town website, where to find information, that is a very good place to find accurate information as far as plans associated with the town, resources that may be linked through like planning board. They may be linked to our regional planning council, which they just did a climate adaptation plan, or mitigation plan, for the entire region. So on a regional scale, looking at what is being encouraged to be implemented, that's a huge resource to be able to dig through. Even though it's a multi-page document, it's an interesting thing that you can look at, or even just looking at their maps and diagrams to gather that same information that they're narrating throughout the paper or the report. In addition to that, I know from a conservation standpoint, I post helpful links, whether it be pest management or vegetation management, things that are conservation related, things that I'm doing, where the Trails Committee is helping, we're doing, and the Concom's encouraging people to do, or look at the resources that the organizations and agencies that we're associated with are putting out accurate information, tying it into that. Go to the town website, explore it. I can't encourage it enough. In addition, stop by any of the departments and even just say hi, ask questions. We have Viewpoint now, which is great, but we don't get as much foot traffic. So when I used to have people walk in for the reason specific to the permit, but then they'd say, oh,
I saw this animal in my yard and I had no idea what it was and I don't know what the problem is, or same thing with the plant that, or someone surprisingly did not know what knotweed is and we had a conversation about that. So I think that's important as well, is knowing that we're not only there for the regulatory side, but we're there to help and we're there to provide the education. I did include some published material over there. We have our stewardship plan for the natural, wild, and scenic river. We have the open space and recreation plan. We have biomap 2, which these are documents that are all available on the town website and online at other sites. They're also available hard copy in my office, and you're free to borrow them at any time, or stop in town hall with your coffee, go to the big table and say, oh, I'm gonna look at this book. That's completely fine. The resources are there for you to look at as well, aside from me using them as reference materials. Or even the bylaws. Come flip through the bylaws and regulations, and maybe you have an idea of how we can improve them. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. But does anybody else have any questions?
One thing I hadn't heard mentioned is, and it seems to be a real weakness of ours all the time, is the energy grid. That's a real vulnerability.
Yes. Energy grid specific to, do you have like a specific, or just in general?
Well, I think just in general, I mean, it seems as though there's been a big solar push, that's great. But every time we have a major snowstorm, lines go down, the elderly in particular are vulnerable, their heat goes out, their water goes out.
And I heard Hudson, like their electric rates are way lower than what Bolton is.
They have a town.
Oh, they do. And
They're
so
not
we're
getting it
too
from-
small. We're too small.
Well, they also, it all depends on what kind of fuel they're buying. You know, so they may be buying fossil fuels as opposed to renewable energy. They buy it from different places and they buy price as opposed to, you know, renewable stuff.
There's a committee
National
on that
Grid is-
too,
Oh, there is?
in town.
What?
But while we're on that subject,
There is.
Gordon Taylor, by the way.
Yes.
You don't know who I am. There was some talk of putting a solar array on the dump or some similar place.
There's one behind the transfer station right now.
There is one there. That's private.
That's a private
That
one.
one just street Chelmsford.
That's Bolton Orchard's own.
Yeah, it's
Private.
That's private.
Did anything ever happen about that? Since it's sort of related.
We've asked
I
Don
did
Rowe
hear
a few
about that
times,
somewhere.
and he keeps saying, yeah, it's still on my list, so.
I don't know. I can ask that question.
You
though,
asked
see
what
what
I
they come up with.
You've been
Yeah, about that
talking- I
implementation plan.
I can actually answer
Done
that.
somebody's
Well,
mess
there was a
up.
cap, there was a cap for a while.
What happened was
where
there
they
was a
couldn't even
cap
apply.
on the amount of renewable energy that National Grid and Eversource had to purchase. And there was a cap that was based on municipal arrays or commercial arrays versus individuals. And it was capped so low that our system never made it. You know, there was such a long line of people wanting to put in municipal or commercial solar arrays that they met the cap like every 3 months. And then the legislation would have to go. So we have to really work on this. This is a situation where what's called the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which sets a percentage of renewable energy that the electricity suppliers must meet each year. There was a bill in the Massachusetts Senate this past session that would set that at a 3% increase each year. It got to the House, and the House cut it back to 2% increase. So that, it just happened that and the person who was going to do it for us just lost interest after it wasn't ever going to get approved.
So that does bring up a good point, though, talking about
property that's not really used anymore, it has to be capped at some point. Do we look into renewable energy, or do we use it as, leaving it as it is, providing habitat around it? There is a substantial amount of resource right now, or, excuse me, there's a lot of research going on, not a substantial amount of research, about the habitat that may be provided or existing underneath these solar fields. So you no longer have, you may go from a forested area to a meadow-like area, but you're still supplying some sort of habitat. And they're doing research right now into what exactly that is, what species can thrive there, what animals will still use that beyond just migrating through. And that I am very interested in hearing about what they find. And that's been going on for I think 2 years now, if not longer. The individuals who I know that have been looking into it have been looking into it for about 2 years now. So.
You talking about at solar installations?
Solar on the ground. Solar, yeah, solar. But that's an important conversation of.
Because there's also a lot going on with light pollution and how that affects animals as well.
Exactly. So, and that's the conversation that I think you could have a whole talk on. In fact, I know you could have a whole talk on that.
Light pollution?
Pros and cons of solar, pros and cons of the light reflection and impacts. Basically knocking down a forest, put on a solar field. But at the same time, on an area that, going back to the landfill, that's already degraded to a certain extent, what is the value of potentially making that a renewable energy source versus letting it regenerate itself?
Large parking lots with raised panels above it, providing a roof for the parking lot and.
Yep. Yeah, so using, again, areas that are already degraded to a certain extent, providing or not providing any form of habitat or useful habitat, but getting value out of it and improving the resiliency to the town regarding energy at least. Yes, Gordon?
Yeah, while we're talking about dump.
It's a recycle center. I'm sure we know what.
There's a lot of my former refuse ended up in that pile for recycling. So the best is that family connections here have been here for a lot longer than we're alive, most of it. And it was a dump a long time ago. And we talked about water earlier and the effect of pollution. I know this thing's been capped, but that thing is sitting there with stuff that was put there a long time ago. Do we have a feel for how that's eventually likely to reach out into the aquifer?
I don't have the answer to that. I do know if it's a lined landfill, then that obviously stops the leaching because the requirements they need the requirements that are there during the installation process. However, I don't know enough specifics about our landfill. That would be Department of Public Works. But I'll talk with Joe and see what he has to say. It is a valid question. Yes.
One of our aquifers in town is underneath the dump.
Yes.
Underneath the recycle center.
Yeah, and I wanted to know, because the town even considered buying some land for municipal services or for what the town needs in the future. Like there's 41 acres still up for sale on Forbush Mill, which is right beside DPW. That we don't have any municipal land anymore.
To expand, or just.
That is one of the topics in the master plan.
Yeah.
Municipal services and municipal facilities.
Facilities.
But, sorry.
Go ahead.
Presumably if that land gets houses, they're going to get wells, and it's going to take water from that same aquifer that's right below the dump. So just bring it all back to rubbish.
That is the theme sometimes. So regarding land acquisition, so that's in terms of, land acquisition for municipal or conservation land. You mentioned the property out from Forbush. We are actively looking at that. We were before the Board of Selectmen to just confirm their interest in it as well, to see is it feasible to acquire that land, how can we acquire it. Concom at their last 2 meetings ago, they approved and authorized me to reach out to get an appraisal for the land. So we are actually actively looking into purchasing that property or acquiring that land and pursuing grants associated.
I wondered why, if it was at all possible to consider the Weatherby land for solar. You know, I know it's town land now, but in the back, it's all gravel. Why?
It's a
conservation
conservation
restriction.
not all.
It sounds like a different topic.
In agriculture, it's all gravel. But, you know, it's clear,
Yeah.
you know.
So I think that'll be talked about more throughout the master plan process, it sounds like, because there's a section on land acquisition or municipal properties or projection into the future. So, to be continued on that conversation, but it is valid both from a mitigation perspective of building resiliency through having open space, which we do have quite a few properties. We have the open space, which needs to be updated. This one's from 2017. We already have a few more properties that we've acquired through the Foxbury development or just donations. So along with that, it's also looking at the expansion of where do we go if with more people in town, maybe we need better town offices, maybe we need bigger public safety facilities, and planning for that. And I think that's a good transition into the master plan, which we'll be hearing a lot about coming up, along with, again, if we're awarded the funds for this program, that will come up again throughout the process, in the more formal process of the MVP planning grant process. Any more questions? We have 5 more minutes.
Do you know anything about the test wells that they have in town, around town? I mean, they have a series of wells because of at the common. Yeah. And then they had something for the shared well for the library and the safety building, and they, I think they had a total of 4, and I'm just wondering what they're finding. There were a number of test wells, you know, places that they're monitoring pollution.
So that would be the show board.
Okay, so I have to talk to the board.
Yep. And the local board of health would probably be able to correct you there, or simply just ask Bill Brookings, is a representative from the show board of health, who's very knowledgeable on surveying and monitoring that carries on.
If they're fine.
If it's there.
The types of things are fine.
Yep. Yeah, you should be able to at least provide insight on what they're monitoring, whether or not they have results. I would assume they have results.
I mean, all the stuff that's going on up at Devon's, and I don't know if anybody has actually started looking for the same types of chemicals here.
Probably.
You're talking about contamination monitoring wells? Okay, that's all on the DEP website. I'm familiar with it.
On the state website.
Yeah.
No, DEP.
The DEP website. But the results
Does it
of those.
include the Bolton wells?
Oh, yes.
It does, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that was determined to be contaminated is going through remediation and monitoring. And that is in fact the case of both the DPW site as well as the town government.
Were there things of concern on those? Have you looked at it?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean,
Shipped many truckloads.
I thought that things were, they had a certain number of years where they're starting to.
Oh, yeah, no, it's
getting better.
It's getting much better.
Okay.
And there's only
That's good news.
one element now, virtually everything else was removed, physically removed.
So that's a good
So
Where's
the
our
landfill might be different.
Yeah, landfills are That's a
Yeah,
good story too.
Smith's was
knowing
correct.
that we had
85
pretty
years
terribly
ago.
contaminated site that the Conservation Trust did a huge project and beneficial project, not only from the cleanup perspective, but also working with the town and providing the town with such a nice community space. I don't think we could have asked for a better turnout with that. I came in on the back end of that project, but I've read all the files and read up on the history of the town common and what was there before. And, it is an immense effort that they put in, but that's adaptation and mitigation as well. Just cleaning up those areas so they don't leach further into our water tables or aquifers, and things are carried throughout the waterways. There's a lot, it's all connected.
Hey, Rebecca, one question.
Yes.
I've been chair of both Conservation Commission and the Board of Health, and I've always asked myself, as being a results-oriented person, who is responsible for checking water quality of surface water in this town?
That's a question that I
Thank
can't
you.
answer. But that is a very good question.
And to the best of my knowledge, Ken, correct me, we did it. Conservation Commission did it once because of salt pollution.
Yes.
And the results were very interesting in that it was great growth. And because of the wetlands on the north side of Great Brook by the Slaters, the level of salt pollution going into that was probably 3 times what came out.
But isn't that isn't that highway plowed by the state though?
No.
I mean,
No.
is that one, we do that? I mean,
So we did that.
No, we,
that was something I was
So
gonna
we
bring
do-
up.
the state ends
I'll
at
look
85.
into that to see the exact answer, because it may be a combination of the two in terms of the actual responsibility. But we do, like I said, the water testing, but it's basic water testing, and it's for an outreach program, it's not that specific.
not
But
water testing.
I do know Board of Health did some testing specific to some of the
I've talked to
homes and
Chris
the
about that.
issues. Yeah, Chris
Chris
is the one I've
Slade
spoken with as well.
But the only one that I'm aware of, semi-officially, was the salt study, and that was 1980, maybe, 78.
So maybe it's time to get we start doing this.
Did you still use salt? Still salt the road? I mean,
Well, I would say more so now than they used to.
Yeah, it's much more.
Yeah.
But the problem is that the drains and all the stormwater drains pretty much go straight into Great Brook.
yeah, right, I know. I mean, that was something I was gonna try to bring up here, about the runoff on 117, because cars coming down, going back and forth to work on that do put a lot of CO2 into the air, and you know, that affects the vegetation along the sides of the road. That might be something that is worth thinking about as we
Well,
go forward.
it's taken out all the main ones.
Yeah, I understand.
But I think it's something that needs to be looked into, and an integrated approach needs to come up. And, you know, to determine the efficacy of both Concom and the Board of Health, the bottom line is the water quality, and somebody needs to take a look at that.
That, the comment about the side of the road just sparked another thing about the bittersweet, is that what it is?
You don't like bittersweet?
Never battle, like, and
It takes years, it
Yeah.
takes years to kill it.
So it's a love-hate
It's a,
relationship.
yes, it certainly is.
But we do have, there's an app, they could report invasive species. There's also, I've been tracking it on our conservation properties, so I have an internal database of our invasive species. And as far as conservation properties goes, it's really Fightshire that has a large concentration of a lot of variation in the invasive species that we see there. But it is, I mean, throughout, but really what the focus is, at least my focus is on managing the properties. And the Trails Committee has done a great effort at Bower Springs already too, which I'm sure most of you, if you frequent that property, have seen already. Attacking the bittersweet, attacking things that are basically choking out the dominant vegetation that's there and that we want to keep.
because my neighbor told me that it can, like, actually pull trees over.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
forestry is a great choice.
Oh,
basically.
So if you are passionate about invasive species management, we don't do any chemical controls on our conservation properties, but we do encourage you to control and manually remove these species, but it's really knowing, if you look up, and I have some great links and resources on our conservation page, and I think Bolton Local may have some as well, or at least people to point you to. It's knowing when is best. I mean, any time is good. But knowing, before the fruit comes out, because then if you're pulling things around, you're shaking it, things are dropping, the seeds go, and like bittersweet, you pull up one piece and you'll notice it's just a network of roots. So it's also understanding the disturbance area and then being able to plant something native, so it's basically revegetating and providing at least a little bit of competition before it comes back. Knotweed is also.
Because every time I
Poison
pull
ivy
out,
is not invasive. It's not invasive.
And did they grow together, right? Do they? Because every time I pull up bittersweet, I get poison ivy.
Sometimes they do, I think it's more about
Is there something specific you'd recommend for planting that grows quickly and can fill in?
I get that question a lot. The more, if you can plant like a native shrub or something that's already a little bit more mature than just seeding, that's the best case scenario. But just throwing down the seed right after disturbance during the growing season, and just fighting it along the way. Definitely a labor-intensive process, but it can be done. But like Rona was saying, it does take years. And we're lucky enough to have our Trails Committee really put some pressure on that.
What we've done is that when we go walking on the trails, we carry it with us.
Yes.
And if you see, if you see bittersweet, especially going up a young tree, we'll cut it and then keep an eye on it. And then once it's dead, then you have a little bit of time.
Respite.
So just
just so you can't eat it. Just don't pull it and shake with berries all around.
And for those watching at home, because this is recorded, Alice did bring up a very good point about if you see something, do something about it, but make sure you know what you're cutting.
Right.
Or what you're pulling, especially on the conservation properties, because we do have some unique vegetation throughout that we don't want impacted. Bittersweet, once you know what it looks like, you can't unsee it. Same thing with knotweed or multiflora rose, so you'll pick up on it. And we do certainly need the help, but definitely know your IDs on these invasive species before you take your scissors out or pulling it. We also have volunteer opportunities. I'll put in a plug for the Trails Committee and
If you
with
want to pull
Concom.
up bittersweet, come on along, we'll show you exactly how to do it.
Yes.
It's a very aerobic.
Our yard is inundated.
Yeah, weed euonymus is another one
That's another
that's
one.
spreading all over town.
People use
What
that
is
as a.
What's that?
Weed euonymus. Yeah. And a lot of it is at town hall. And I have
Yes.
said to DPW, please pull this stuff out. And now it's all behind in the woods and they're still not doing anything. I've given up.
I agree.
Don't give up on it.
Yeah, you can't give up. So we are running a couple minutes over, but I appreciate all of you coming and engaging in this conversation and dialogue. I encourage you to continue the dialogue as hopefully we move forward, whether it be through the formal process or informally meeting through our regular Concom meetings. Come in, borrow the documentation and the published documents that I have. Look online. This will not be the last forum and discussion we have on climate adaptation and resiliency. And if you have questions, my email is on the town website. I can try to answer your questions the best of my ability, and if I can, I will direct you to resources that most likely will be able to provide you with a little bit more accurate information.
And I would like to make sure everybody's on this mailing
Yes.
list, email address, Social Security number, bank accounts.
If you have not provided your name and email for attending today, we would appreciate it, but I also understand people get tons of emails. I promise to not bombard you with junk email. It would be specific to programs related to climate adaptation resiliency and education outreach programs and workshops. We do have an agricultural workshop coming up on February 19th, which is part of that larger workshop I mentioned earlier. We'll be talking about Chapter 61 ag land. We will also be talking about agricultural preservation restrictions and just trying to focus on agriculture, obviously, and what we can do, what tools there are for land managers, landowners, or even just, like I said, corridor neighborhoods that don't want to see agricultural land be turned into a development or changed use, and what they may be able to do in terms of sparking that conversation to continue that preservation in its current state. But thank you so much. I will be here for a couple minutes. If you feel empowered, can you please stack a chair? Otherwise, I have no problem doing it. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna let you